They thought I was on welfare. They whispered that I was clinging to a life long past its prime. Even my daughter, Rachel, used to look at me as if I were nothing more than a relic with no real value, until the night she opened the silver box I had hidden deep in a drawer, and her world changed color. Inside were yellowed papers, adoption papers, a letter, a piece of my past that I had buried for 17 years. She held the letter in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks, and looked at me not as a mother, but as someone betrayed. "You're not my mother," she said, her voice choking. "You've lied to me all my life." But Rachel didn't know. The things I'd done to protect her, the truths I'd endured alone, the strangers I'd helped without a word, the times I silently paid for other people's mistakes were not for thanks, but because I believed that sometimes keeping kindness in silence is stronger than showing it. This old house that everyone calls monument contains a past that no one dares to guess. Have you ever been misunderstood by the people you love? Have you ever suffered in silence to preserve an unrequited love? Then stay with me. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, because the truth is not always in what we see, but in what we have not asked. The Burlington Farmers Market thrummed with October's pulse, the air heavy with cinnamon and the tang of roasted apples. Red maple leaves danced across the cobblestones, catching the morning light like fleeting flames. I, Margaret Whitmore, 62, wove through the crowd, my green wool sweater frayed at the cuffs, my gray skirt brushing my ankles. My silver hair tied low gleamed, but it was my simplicity. Scuffed flats, the rusty SUV parked nearby, that drew sharp, judging eyes, like vultures circling a quiet prey. "Margaret Whitmore," Helen's voice hissed, not loud but venomous, meant to sting. She stood by a pumpkin stall, her floral dress clashing with the autumn haze, whispering to a friend, "Old as sin, raising that rebel Rachel? She's got nothing but that decaying house, mark my words." My fingers tightened on the cart's cold handle, but I kept my eyes on the apples ahead. Helen's gossip was an old wound, reopened daily. People saw my worn clothes, my widow's life, and wrote my story, a retired nurse, scraping by. They didn't know the Victorian I'd restored with George, its oak floors gleaming under crystal light, or the wealth I hid, tethered to his memory. I chose this quiet, this humility, because it kept me whole. At the coffee stall, I handed Sarah a $5, slipping $2 into the tip jar. "Lovely brew, dear," I said, her smile of fleeting warmth. But Helen's gaze followed. Her lips pursed like she'd tasted rot. I straightened, refusing to bend under her scorn. By the pumpkin stall, a young man lingered, his jacket torn, stubble shadowing his jaw, his green eyes, weary yet fierce, fixed on the apples, hands buried in his pockets to resist temptation. I stepped closer, my voice a gentle thread. "You all right?" He flinched, eyes snapping to mine, as if I'd caught him in a crime. Fine, ma'am," he muttered, voice rough. I opened my purse, pressed a 50 into his hand. "Buy dinner, okay? Come back tomorrow. I need help with the fence." His fingers shook, closing around the bill, hope flickering in his gaze. "Thank you. I'm Ethan," he whispered. Helen's voice sliced through. "Foolish old woman," she said, loud enough to burn. "Giving money to a drifter? She'll be broke by spring." I ignored her. Ethan nodded, slipping away, and I knew he'd return. I'd seen that look in school kids, lost, starving for trust. Helen's words couldn't touch that truth. Home, my Victorian stood under the autumn sun, its faded paint hiding grandeur. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and memory. I brewed Earl Grey, the scent curling around me as I opened a drawer, fingers brushing George's gold watch, engraved GW. It could buy a car, but it was him. His laugh, his love. The watch sat beside a silver box, locked, holding secrets I wasn't ready to share. The door slammed. Rachel stormed in, red-streaked black hair spilling from her hoodie, her gray-blue eyes a brewing storm. At 17, she was a tempest I couldn't calm. "Hey," I said softly. "Apple pie for dinner?" She glanced at the watch, then me, her voice sharp. "Why keep that? You live like a pauper, Margaret, but you've got stuff like that. What's your deal?" Her words, calling me Margaret, stabbed deep. I forced a smile. "It's a keepsake, not money," I said, but she scoffed. boots thudding upstairs. I watched her go, my chest tight, seeing the baby I'd cradled, 9 months old, her hand clutching mine. Now, that bond was fraying, stretched by secrets I feared to face. In my armchair, I opened another drawer, touching the yellowed envelope, Lisa's letter, Rachel's birth mother. I'd promised truth, but fear stopped me. Fear Rachel would see me as a stranger. I closed the drawer, whispering, "Not yet." That night, floorboards creaked. Rachel's shadow moved in the living room, searching. My heart raced, but I stayed still, knowing what she'd find. Morning came, and the silver box was ajar, adoption papers disturbed. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, a slice of pie half-eaten, her eyes not rebellious, but searching, haunted. I poured tea, hands steady despite the storm inside. "Sleep well?" I asked, but her silence screamed louder than words. The truth was clawing free, and I wasn't ready. The kitchen smelled of apple pie, warm and sweet, but a colder current ran beneath, anger, betrayal, and a secret I'd held too long. I stood at the counter, my hands gripping the wood, as Rachel's voice cut through the stillness. "What are you hiding?" she demanded, her gray blue eyes blazing, the adoption papers trembling in her fist. "I'm not your kid. Am I, Margaret?" My heart lurched, but I kept my voice calm, though it felt like whispering in a hurricane. "Rachel, let's talk, please," I said, my eyes begging. "Not like this." "No," she snapped, stepping closer, red-streaked hair falling into her face. "You've lied my whole life. Who am I?" Calling me Margaret was a blade, twisting deep. I wasn't her mother in that moment, just a stranger who'd failed her. I swallowed, glancing at the photo frame, a faded shot of Rachel at 3, giggling in my arms. That girl was gone. "We'll talk," I said, "but not in anger." Rachel's scoff stung, and she stormed upstairs, the door slamming like a gunshot. I sank into a chair, hands shaking, Lisa's voice echoing, "Tell her I loved her." Morning brought no peace. Burlington streets buzzed with fall, the air crisp as I walked to the cafe, my blue sweater loose. I ordered a pumpkin latte, tipping $2, and saw Clara, the council chair, at a table. "Margaret," she said, eyes twinkling, "the library's repairs are on track thanks to you. Why hide it?" "Just helping," I said, but Rachel, across the street, watched with a frown, her hoodie tight. She thought I was grandstanding, another wedge between us. Home was a battlefield. Rachel barely spoke, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Then Daniel and Melissa arrived, their BMW gleaming against my weathered Victorian. Daniel, Rachel's friend, wore a smug vest, Melissa's red dress flashing as she scanned my chipped teacup. "Margaret," she said, "sell this relic. Get a condo, something modern." I poured tea, ignoring the barb. "This suits me," I said, but Daniel's glance at Rachel screamed, "How do you stand her?" Rachel flushed, avoiding my eyes, ashamed of my shabby life. I wanted to tell them about George's fortune, but silence was my shield. At the community center, a poster read, "Thank you, anonymous donor." My library donation was secret, but whispers followed. "Not Margaret Whitmore," a woman scoffed. "She's nobody." I kept walking, but saw Ethan now raking my leaves, his green eyes bright. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I got a job because of you." "You earned it," I said, warmth cutting through my unease. His gratitude was a spark in the gloom. That night, dinner was war. Rachel's fork scraped, pie untouched. "Stop pretending," she said, voice low, lethal. I found her letter. From her. My breath caught. Lisa's letter, hidden in the silver box, had betrayed me. I stood, hands trembling, and retrieved it, its edges worn from my touch. Rachel's voice rose, shattering. "You're not my mother," she screamed, tears spilling. "You lied." The room spun. "Rachel," I said, voice breaking, "you're my daughter in every way." Her eyes burned with betrayal. I held out the letter, its weight crushing. "This is the truth," I whispered. "Read it. I love you." Rachel snatched it, sobs echoing as she ran upstairs, the door slamming. I stood alone, the photo mocking me. I'd kept my promise, but the cost was a wound I couldn't close, and I didn't know if we'd survive it. The muffled sobs from Rachel's room pierced the quiet of the house, each one a jagged shard in my heart. She was reading the letter, those brittle yellowed words from Lisa, her birth mother, that I'd guarded for 17 years. I loved you, but I couldn't keep you. I stood outside her door, my hand hovering, the wood cool against my palm. I wanted to knock, to hold her, to soothe the pain I'd unleashed, but fear rooted me to the spot. I'd given her the truth, as I'd promised Lisa all those years ago, but would it mend us or break us forever? The uncertainty was a weight I could scarcely bear. I retreated to the kitchen, where the scent of apple pie lingered, now cold and forgotten on the counter. The silver-framed photo of Rachel at 3, her tiny arms around my neck, stared back, a cruel reminder of a time when I was her world. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling, and closed my eyes. Lisa's face swam before me, barely 20, tears streaming as she handed me a 9-month-old Rachel, her voice breaking. Give her a better life than I can. I'd promised to love her, to tell her the truth when the time came, but now, as Rachel's sobs echoed, I wondered if I'd failed them both. Thanksgiving's glow bathed Burlington, the streets alive with pumpkins and lanterns, the air crisp with the promise of snow. I wore my navy sweater, the one George always loved, its soft wool a faint comfort as I walked to the community center for the town's annual gathering. My boots clicked on the pavement, but my mind was trapped in the kitchen, replaying Rachel's scream, "You're not my mother!" And the moment I'd handed her the letter, its weight like a stone in my hand. The truth was out, but it had torn open wounds I didn't know how to heal. The community center buzzed with warmth, tables laden with roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, and pies, the air thick with laughter and the clink of glasses. A banner hung above the stage. Thank you, anonymous donor. My donation had saved the town's library, a quiet act I'd insisted on keeping secret. Let the town whisper. They always did. I spotted Clara, the council chair, her gray hair pinned neatly, and she waved me over. Margaret, she said, her voice low but firm, we're announcing the donor tonight. It's time the town knew. I shook my head, my heart racing. Clara, it's not about me, I said, but her smile was unyielding, her eyes glinting with determination. I glanced around, and there was Rachel, standing in the crowd, her red-streaked hair pulled back, her gray-blue eyes red-rimmed but steady. She hadn't spoken to me since last night, and her presence here felt like a fragile thread, hope or heartbreak, I couldn't tell. Daniel and Melissa were there too, their city Polish stark against the flannel and denim of the locals. Daniel, Rachel's friend, wore a tailored vest, his smug confidence grating. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, swept in with her red dress, her sharp tongue barely veiled as she'd once called my Victorian a relic. Andrew, my son, stood beside them, his suit crisp, his face guarded, still doubting my ability to handle Rachel. They'd all judged me, my worn clothes, my quiet life, my irrelevance, and I'd let them, keeping George's fortune hidden. But Rachel's judgment cut deepest, and her silence was a wound that wouldn't close. Clara took the stage, her voice cutting through the chatter. Tonight, we honor the person who saved our library, she said, her eyes finding mine. Margaret Whitmore, please come up. The room fell silent, then erupted in whispers. Margaret, a man muttered nearby. Her? She drives that rusty SUV. Another voice, Helen's, hissed. Impossible! She's nobody! My legs felt heavy as I climbed the steps, every eye on me. Helen's shock, Melissa's disbelief, Daniel's frown, Andrew's raised brow. Rachel stood still, her gaze locked on me, unreadable. The letter clutched in her hand. Clara handed me a plaque, her voice warm. Margaret's generosity kept our community whole. She's our unsung hero. Before I could speak, a young man stepped forward, his face familiar. Ethan, the boy from the farmer's market, now in a clean jacket, his green eyes bright with purpose. I need to say something, he said, his voice steady, commanding the room. Mrs. Whitmore gave me a chance when I had nothing, a meal, a job, a reason to keep going. I was homeless, but she saw me. I'm Ethan Carter, son of James Carter, and my father's here tonight because of her. The crowd gasped. James Carter, Burlington's biggest philanthropist, stood, his face beaming as he clapped. Margaret's no ordinary woman, he said, his voice carrying. She's been managing investments for years, quietly building a fortune from her late husband, George Whitmore. She's the heart of this town. The room exploded in applause. a roar that shook the rafters. Helen's jaw dropped, Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, Daniel's smugness crumbled, and Andrew's guarded look melted into something like awe. They judged me, old, poor, irrelevant, but the truth was out, a twist of fate that changed their eyes. But my gaze was on Rachel. Her lips parted, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched the letter, her sobs barely contained. She pushed through the crowd, her voice breaking as she reached the stage. "Mom," she choked, throwing her arms around me, the letter crinkling between us. "I was wrong. You're my mother. I'm so sorry." Her words were a balm, healing wounds I'd carried for years, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt, a shadow of Lisa's memory lingering. I held her tightly, my own tears falling, whispering, "You're my daughter, always." The crowd cheered, their voices a wave, but I felt the weight of Rachel's unspoken questions. She'd read the letter, understood Lisa's love, but a part of her was still searching, reaching for a woman she'd never know. I stroked her hair, my heart aching, knowing this moment was only a pause, not an end. Later, at home, we set the Thanksgiving table, candles flickering like fragile hope. Rachel helped, her smile tentative, but her glances at the letter, now tucked in her pocket, betrayed her. Andrew, Daniel, and Melissa joined us, their apologies quiet but sincere, their eyes softer, humbled. Ethan stopped by, bringing a pie from his father, his gratitude a silent bond that warmed me. As we ate, the turkey golden and the pumpkin pie fragrant, I watched Rachel trace the letter's edge with her finger, her mind elsewhere. The town had seen me, not as a widow scraping by, but as a woman of strength and kindness. But Rachel's heart was restless, and I feared what she'd seek next. The truth had brought us closer, but it had also opened a door to Lisa's shadow, and I didn't know if I could follow her through it without losing her. I looked at George's watch on the mantel, its gold glinting in the candlelight, and felt his presence, steadying me. The meal ended with laughter, but Rachel's eyes, when they met mine, held a question she hadn't yet asked. The truth had changed everything, but it hadn't settled her soul, and I braced for the storm that lay ahead. Snow fell softly outside the Victorian, cloaking Burlington in a quiet that felt both peaceful and heavy. Inside, the living room glowed with the warmth of a crackling fire, the scent of pine from the Christmas tree mingling with the cinnamon of apple cider simmering in the kitchen. I, Margaret Whitmore, stood by the tree, my navy sweater loose on my frame, untangling a string of lights. At 62, I thought the truth, the letter from Rachel's birth mother, had set us free. But as I glanced at Rachel, her red-streaked hair catching the firelight, I saw a shadow in her gray-blue eyes, a question she hadn't yet asked. "Mom," she said, her voice tentative, holding a glass ornament shaped like a star. "Do you think she's out there? My other mom?" The words hung between us, sharp and fragile, threatening the fragile peace we'd built since Thanksgiving, when she'd called me Mom again, her arms around me in front of the town. I set the lights down, my heart tightening. "Rachel," I said, keeping my voice steady, "the letter told you, her heart. She loved you, but she couldn't keep you. That's what matters." I wanted to pull her close, to shield her from the pain, but her eyes searched mine, hungry for more. "Did you ever meet her?" she pressed, her fingers tightening on the ornament. "Did she say anything else?" I hesitated, the memory flooding back. Lisa, barely 20, tears streaming as she handed me 9-month-old Rachel, her voice breaking. "Give her a better life than I can." I'd promised to tell Rachel the truth, but not the details that might hurt her more, Lisa's struggles, her shame. "I met her once," I said carefully. "She wanted you to be happy." Rachel's face fell, and she turned away, hanging the ornament with a trembling hand. I need to know who I am," she whispered, and the words cut deeper than her scream a month ago. "You're not my mother?" The tension lingered as we decorated, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. I tried to focus on the lights, the ornaments George and I had collected, but Rachel's question gnawed at me. Was I enough for her, or would the ghost of Lisa pull her away? That afternoon, I walked to the community center, snow crunching under my boots, to drop off blankets for a winter drive. Rachel stayed home, claiming a headache, but I suspected she needed space. At the center, Clara greeted me, her gray hair tucked under a scarf. Margaret, you're a saint, she said, taking the blankets. But some folks are talking, saying you're only helping to look good after the library donation. I forced a smile, though the words stung. Let them talk, I said, but as I handed a blanket to a young mother, her toddler shivering in a thin jacket, I overheard a man mutter, "She's just buying praise." I ignored him, wrapping the blanket around the child, whose smile was worth more than any rumor. But the doubt lingered. Would people ever see me? Not my wealth or my age, but me? Back home, I found Rachel in the kitchen, the yellowed letter open on the table, her eyes red. "I found her name," she said, her voice shaking. "Lisa Marie. There's an address in the letter, Montpellier. I want to find her." My heart sank, but I nodded, my throat tight. "If that's what you need, we'll do it together," I said, though fear clawed at me. What if Lisa was still alive, waiting to claim her? What if Rachel chose her over me? I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her gaze fixed on the letter. That night, as snow fell thicker, I sat by the fire, George's watch glinting on the mantel. Ethan had stopped by earlier, bringing a carved wooden star for our tree, his gratitude a quiet reminder of why I kept giving, despite the whispers. But Rachel's words echoed louder. I need to know who I am. I'd given her the truth, but it wasn't enough. She was searching again, and I didn't know if I could follow her into that shadow without losing her. I heard her footsteps upstairs, the rustle of paper. She was planning something, maybe writing to that address, maybe leaving me behind. The fire flickered, and I clutched my tea, the warmth doing little to ease the chill in my bones. The truth had brought us closer, but it had also opened a door I couldn't close, and I wasn't ready for what lay on the other side. The snow felt thicker now, cloaking Burlington in a relentless white veil, as if the world itself wanted to bury the past. Inside my Victorian, the Christmas tree glowed in the living room, its lights casting soft shadows on the pine-scented air, but the warmth couldn't reach the chill in my heart. I, Margaret Whitmore, stood at the kitchen counter, my navy sweater loose around my shoulders, stirring a pot of apple cider. At 62, I'd thought the truth, Lisa's letter, Rachel's tearful embrace at Thanksgiving, had stitched us back together. But Rachel's question last week, her need to find her birth mother, had reopened old wounds, and I feared they'd bleed us dry. Rachel sat at the table, her red-streaked hair tucked behind her ears, her gray-blue eyes fixed on a piece of paper. The letter, with Lisa's Montpellier address scrawled in faded ink. She'd been quiet since finding it, her silence louder than her scream a month ago. "You're not my mother?" I set a mug of cider before her, my voice soft. "Rachel, you warm enough? It's cold today." She didn't look up, her fingers tracing the address. "I wrote to her," she said, her voice flat like she was testing me. "Lisa, I sent a letter to Montpellier. I need to know who she was." My heart sank, but I nodded, hiding the tremor in my hands. "I understand," I said, though every word felt like a surrender. I'd promised Lisa I'd tell Rachel the truth, but I hadn't prepared for this, for her to chase a ghost who might steal her from me. "Whatever you find, we'll face it together." Rachel's eyes flicked to mine, sharp with doubt. "You knew her, didn't you? Why didn't you tell me more?" Her voice rose, edged with accusation. "You're still hiding things, Mom." The word Mom softened the blow, but not enough. I sat across from her, the cider's steam curling between us. "I met Lisa once," I said, choosing my words like steps on thin ice. "She was young, struggling, but she loved you, that's all I know." It wasn't the whole truth, Lisa's addiction, her shame, her plea for me to take Rachel, but I couldn't burden Rachel with that, not yet. She scoffed, pushing the letter away. "You always say just enough," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to know who I am." She stood, her chair scraping, and left the kitchen, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. I stared at the letter, its edges worn from her touch, and felt Lisa's shadow loom larger than ever. That afternoon, I walked through the snow to the community center, where I'd organized a Christmas charity event, gifts and meals for families in need. The streets glittered with holiday lights, but my heart was heavy, Rachel's words echoing, "You're still hiding things." At the center, tables were piled with wrapped presents and baskets of food, the air warm with the scent of hot cocoa. Clara greeted me, her scarf bright against her gray hair. "Margaret, you're a miracle," she said, hugging me, "but some folks are whispering, saying you're doing this for attention, now that everyone knows your wealth." I forced a smile, though the words stung like frostbite. "They'll talk," I said, but it was as I handed a gift to a young boy, his eyes bright with joy, I overheard a woman mutter, "She's just showing off." I ignored her, focusing on the boy's grin, but the doubt crept in. Would they ever see my heart? Not my money or my age. Ethan was there, helping carry boxes, his green eyes steady. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, pausing, "my dad's expanding the shelter because of you. You're changing lives." His gratitude, like the pendant he'd carved for our tree, was a spark of light, but it couldn't banish the shadow of Rachel's search. Back home, Rachel was in her room, the door ajar. I knocked softly, but she didn't answer. On her desk lay a new letter, stamped but unopened, the return address from Montpellier. My stomach twisted as I saw her, curled on her bed, tears staining her cheeks. "Rachel," I whispered, stepping inside. She sat up, her voice raw. "She's gone," she said, holding the letter. "Lisa. The letter came back. Her neighbor wrote. She died years ago. Overdose." Her sobs broke free, and I knelt beside her, my heart shattering. "Why didn't you tell me she was broken?" she demanded, her eyes accusing. "You let me hope." I reached for her, but she pulled away. "I didn't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I wanted to protect you." It was half true. I'd suspected Lisa's fate, but hadn't confirmed it, fearing this moment. Rachel's glare cut deep, and she clutched the letter, her pain a wall between us. That night, I sat by the fire, George's watch glinting on the mantel, its steady tick a reminder of time slipping away. Rachel stayed upstairs, and I heard the rustle of papers, Lisa's letter, maybe more, then a creak, and Rachel appeared holding a small, worn journal. "It came with the letter," she said, her voice hollow. "Lisa's diary." I braced myself, fearing what it held, but Rachel's eyes softened, a flicker of something new. "She wrote about you," she said, her voice barely audible. "You helped her, gave her money, a place to stay before she gave me up. She said you were kind." Her tears fell, but her gaze held mine, not with anger, but with wonder. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I did what I could," I said, memories of Lisa's desperate gratitude flooding back. Rachel sat beside me, the journal open, and read aloud, "Margaret gave me hope, even when I had none. She'll love my baby better than I ever could." Rachel's voice broke, and she leaned into me, her sobs quieter now, her anger melting into grief. I held her, my own tears falling, the fire's warmth wrapping us like a promise. Lisa's words, a twist of fate, had bridged us again, but Rachel's grief was a storm we'd weather together. The Christmas lights glowed, and I knew the truth hadn't finished with us yet, not until Rachel found peace, and I found the courage to let her. The smell of cinnamon and roasted rosemary filled the air as Rachel carefully placed the final candle in its silver holder. The dining room glowed with soft, golden light. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, blanketing Livingston in white quiet. Inside, warmth lingered not just in the oven, but in the spaces between us, spaces that had once been filled with silence. It was Christmas Eve, and we were making dinner together. The turkey was resting under foil, the cranberry sauce was chilling, and Rachel stood beside me at the counter, whisking gravy like she'd been doing it for years. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her hair was tied in a loose knot, a strand falling over one eye as she concentrated. "I can't believe we pulled this off," she said, smiling sideways. "I can," I said. "We've been pulling off miracles for a long time." She laughed, then paused. Her fingers tightened around the wooden spoon. "Margaret," she began. She didn't look up. "I was wrong." The room quieted. I shouldn't have said what I said that night. I didn't know how much I was hurting, or how much I was hurting you. But now I know. You've always been my mom. Always. I turned to her slowly. Her eyes were wet, shining with both guilt and grace. "You don't owe me an apology," I said, "but I'm grateful for it, and I love you." She set the spoon down and stepped into my arms. That embrace wasn't like the ones before, hesitant, fleeting. This one stayed, solid, certain. Later that evening, people began arriving, not for a family dinner, but for something else. 2 weeks earlier, Rachel had posted a message on the town's community board asking if anyone would be alone for Christmas Eve. She and I had decided to host a small dinner for those without family nearby, new immigrants, widowed seniors, college students who couldn't travel home. We had expected maybe 4 or 5 people. 14 came. They arrived with homemade cookies, mismatched scarves, and grateful smiles. The living room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and stories shared between strangers who felt like friends. It was the first time in years that our home felt not just full, but alive. Just after 8 p.m., the doorbell rang again. Rachel opened it and stood frozen. It was Ethan. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, and behind him was a man with graying temples and kind eyes. "Hi," Ethan said, a little breathless. "I hope it's okay. We saw the post. My dad just moved back into town and he didn't want to spend the holiday alone." "Margaret," the man said, stepping forward. "I don't think we've met. I'm Thomas, and my son tells me you're the woman who helped bring him back from a very dark place." I blinked, caught off guard. Ethan looked at Rachel, then at me. "Your kindness changed my life. You didn't even know it, but you treated me like I mattered. I just wanted to say thank you." I nodded, stunned, and waved them in. "Come in. There's always room at this table." Rachel set out 2 more plates without hesitation. The evening carried on, with music playing low and conversations blooming across the table like flowers in winter. Near the end of the night, as we cleared dishes and refilled cups, Rachel disappeared down the hole. When she returned, she was holding a frame, a new photo. It was the one we'd taken 2 weeks earlier at the farmer's market, Rachel and I side by side, laughing in the sunlight. Ethan had snapped it when we weren't paying attention. Behind us was the lavender booth and a hand-painted sign that read, "This kitchen runs on love and leftovers." She hung it on the wall, just above the fireplace, where the old photos had been years before. She stepped back, looked at me, and said, "I think we're ready to make new memories." I didn't respond with words. I just reached out and squeezed her hand. The guests left one by one, bundled in scarves and thank yous. Rachel and I stood by the front door, watching the snow glitter under the streetlight. "Feels different, doesn't it?" she said. "Yes," I whispered. "It feels whole." The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet held peace, not distance, and above the mantel, that photo stayed, not as proof, not as decoration, but as a declaration. We were a family,